Opinions are like assholes. Everybody has one.
I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like this before.
You know, Wobbles, I'm kind of mad at you.
And as a reasonable man, I'm willing to do whatever's necessary to find a peaceful solution to these problems.
Well, welcome listeners around the world to a special episode of the Punching Up Movie Podcast, where we would normally, two long-standing friends would take on a film that is either a beloved cult classic, part of the canon, or just simply very, very well liked. One of us would have something against it and the other would defend it. But now we have our first ever guest. Very, very excited to introduce Matthew Chernov, LA film journalist, screenwriter, and the presenter of I'm not just blowing smoke. Oh, there he is. My favourite movie podcast, How the West Was Cast. Hello, Matthew.
Hello, it's a pleasure to finally see you in person after having that online relationship for a while. This is a pleasure. And Damian, hello to you too.
Yeah, nice to meet you, mate. Nice to meet you.
And Matthew, you've done something a little bit unorthodox for Punching Up. You've actually suggested the film, but it's a film that you like, so you've offered it up almost as like a sort of potential sacrificial lamb, which you're going to stand in front of and stop something horribly ritualistic happening to it. And what is the film?
So we're going to look at the Goonies. We're going to talk about the 1985 cult classic. And I think I feel comfortable calling it that. The Goonies, a movie that, while I don't, it's not in my top 10 or anything, it is a movie that I do genuinely love. I'll say that. I've seen it multiple times. So, I'm ready for whatever you guys throw at me. I know the theme of the show is always like somebody picks the movie they don't like. I told Adam if I was going to come on here, that's not my style. On the How the West Was Cast podcast, we rarely talk about films we don't like. It's just not our vibe. And I'm much happier getting in front of a movie and defending it. I'm often an apologist for some of my favorite filmmakers like Michael Cimino and Brian De Palma and those guys. I'll take on all comers for the movies of theirs that don't get enough love. So I'm ready for whatever you guys throw at the Goonies. I think I can back it up.
Well, Damian is the aggressor. I have to confess, I saw the Goonies for the first time in my life the other day. I'd never seen the Goonies. It completely passed me by. So I will sort of act as a sort of referee and moderator, and then once I reveal my hand, I'll join one of you to take on the other. But that will remain a little bit of a mystery for a few minutes. So what we normally do is we normally have a brief synopsis and then a little bit of unpacking of information about the making of the film. So Damian, you're our synopsis man. So if you'd like to have at it.
My synopsis is going to be very, very brief, and both of you would probably do a better job, but I'm going to go with Richard Donner directs a group of kids who are about to be kicked out of their houses, and they stumble upon a pirate's treasure map, go on an adventure whilst trying to avoid the criminal Fratelli gang and the evil housing developers. And that's your lot, mate. That's all I'm saying.
Well, yeah, and then there's the small business of finding this underground labyrinth filled with pirate treasure.
That's the adventure bit.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think
you guys really that was a very abbreviated summary. I wasn't sure if I was going to be delivering it, so I had a much more eloquent one prepared.
I knew you would do, mate.
Well, I think this is a summary, sort of slightly curtailed.
Okay, here I'm stepping in here.
The film as well. So I think there's a little bit of Goonie sabotage going on before we even sort of get into it. Matthew, do you want to sort of do a better job than Damian?
Here. This is my polished version from a positive take on it. I would say, directed by Richard Donner and produced by Steven Spielberg, who also came up with the story. The Goonies is a comedy adventure about a group of misfit kids from a seaside town in Oregon. Facing the foreclosure of their homes, they stumble upon an old pirate map in one of their attics and decide to go on one last Goonie adventure. But what starts as a hopeful treasure hunt quickly becomes something much bigger as they search underground caves, navigate booby traps, and dodge a family of criminals who are also after the loot. As the kids make their way deeper into the caverns beneath the town, they discover secret passageways, ancient puzzles, and the long-lost pirate ship of the legendary One-Eyed Willie. Along the way, they confront their fears and learn what it really means to stick together. It's a mix of slapstick comedy and special effects, wrapped up in a fast-paced thrill ride that resonates with audiences young and old. That was my radio announcer version.
That sounds amazing, mate. What's that film? That sounds great.
Touche.
Right, I'm going to sort of just give a little bit of background information, and Matthew, please sort of chip in, add to, extemporize on anything I may have left out, because I'm sure you're sort of absolutely steeped in Goonie lore much more than I am.
No, I'm not. Actually, like, making of stuff and those kind of histories of how projects come together are things, whenever I have to write about them, I do the research at the time. I don't carry a lot of that kind of stuff in my head. I carry more buzz and vibes and subtext and that kind of stuff. The actual hardcore making of, who involved who, please share that, because I don't know it.
So the story, I mean, the story of the Goonies is actually quite, we talk a lot about the making of movies, and there's normally a lot of drama, a lot of conflict, and this is probably one of the most harmonious making of stories that I've ever heard. And it starts off as an idea in Spielberg's head, just basically a notion of what do children do on a rainy Sunday afternoon, and then he sort of snowballs from there, and it sort of goes in production. He doesn't want to direct it, so he hires Richard. He doesn't really want to write it either, so he hires Richard Donner to direct it, who obviously has a track record of at this point of having directed The Omen and Superman, and so he's got these two big sort of monoliths behind him, and a very, very kind of estimable career in television. So we can go into that later, but he's directed the Banana Splits, sort of Wanted Dead or Alive, The Rifleman, and things like that. So he comes with a lot of experience, dealing with all sorts of actors, and they cast it with sort of chemistry readings, and so they get the cast they want. Sean Astin famously sort of fluffs his lines and says shit in front of Spielberg, thinks he's sort of blown the deal, and then Spielberg walks out and he thinks that Spielberg's offended, and Spielberg says later, I walked out because clearly my presence in the room was kind of throwing Sean Astin, but he had the role as soon as I saw him, and he assembles this incredible cast of child actors, and they shoot in Oregon, and it's sort of scheduled for, I think it's scheduled for a certain amount of time, but Richard Donner likes the children to improvise, so they added, I think, an extra 2 or 3 weeks onto the shooting schedule just purely with improvisation, which often meant that they had to work weekends. But these turned into these incredible family parties where people brought their children along, and Ki Hui Kwan's mother would bring Vietnamese food. So there's all sorts of stories like that. Lots of pranking on the set. They really like pranking. Harrison Ford turns up, and everyone has been given a copy of a magazine that he's on the cover of. So there's like 300 of these magazine copies, and he walks in and everyone's reading them, and he's getting kind of annoyed as he does, and then he realizes it's a prank. And so they sort of shoot this film. They build this incredible set. And the centerpiece is the Inferno, the pirate ship, which is modeled after Errol Flynn's pirate ship in the Seahawk, which you see, I believe, Chunk watching. He's like a big Errol Flynn fan. There's no real drama. In fact, Richard Donner's very beloved on the set. I think that one of the cast members calls him a Santa Claus. Steven Spielberg actually shoots a lot of second unit stuff and goes uncredited. So the scene where people are sort of sliding down like a little sort of chute, he shoots the kissing scene in the wishing well, he shoots. There's a sequence with an octopus. There's a fight with an octopus that the character Data actually refers to, that's not in the movie, that was shot. I think they spent a week shooting it and then disbanded it. And like the film comes in, I think it's sort of, I'm just trying to have a look at it. It cost $90 million, and it goes on to make $68 million, and it just becomes this sort of beloved cult children's film, really. I mean, it does very well. It's second in the box office to the second Rambo movie, and makes anything, depending on what you read, 64 to 68 million dollars, and sort of launches numerous careers, but in a strange way that we can talk about, in that, and that they all seem to become stars like 10, 20 years later, and then a couple sort of drop off the map altogether, like the child that plays Chunk, Jeff Corey, doesn't really do very well, and then becomes a very, very successful lawyer. His life and background is very sort of impoverished, and Richard Donner kind of mentors him, pays his tuition fees, and then everything comes full circle, and he becomes the man that brokers the deal for Ke Huy Quan's role in Everything Everywhere All at Once, and then Ke Huy Quan, in a very teary Oscar speech, which I sort of watched today, thanks his Goonie brother for life as he accepts the award. And this film has just gone on and on to accrue so much sort of love and sort of devotion. It's absolutely worthy of being here as a sort of punching up target, because although I don't think anybody's saying that it's the sort of best film ever made, and I think it provides the genesis in Christopher Columbus for a sort of dress rehearsal for a sort of better film that he directs, I think, which is sort of obviously Home Alone. You see the genesis. Oh, you're frowning, Matthew. No, you don't think we're going to go. We're getting into it now. This is good. Yeah. So you see the sort of genesis of it in you know the sort of kids versus a criminal gang and lots of booby traps and things like that, and you know you see the ripple effect of it now. I'd say in Stranger Things, Stephen King's always kind of referenced as a sort of creative sort of touchstone for that. But I would say Goonies as much as anything else. And Skeleton Crew, the Star Wars TV series, explicitly seen as a kind of a sort of space version of the Goonies. Now, would you like to add anything to that? That was a little bit of a sort of ramble and a gush. Is there anything, Matthew, that you would like to add to that?
No, that was a pretty, yeah, it was solid summary. I would say that as beloved as the movie is today, and I appreciate, we'll get into it, how you know, this movie has been discovered by new generations who don't have that nostalgia factor that some of us who saw it early on in its first run. They don't have that nostalgia love for it, and yet it's still talking to them. It's still capturing something in them, which I think speaks to a kind of a weird timeless quality about this film. But I would say that there's another side of its fandom that is against the Goonies. That is and I remember it at the time that the film came out, it was kind of annoying to me, and I find it equally annoying these days. And that's the too cool for school crowd who feel that the Goonies is a little too silly or innocuous, or they just don't want to like it, that it's a little too cloying or something. So there's a strong undercurrent of dislike about the Goonies. It's cool not to like the Goonies in some capacity. It's almost less cool to love it. So that's something, as beloved as the movie is, there's something else, especially on with, you know, film scholars. It's not considered, you know, canon.
Yeah. I think this would be a good time to bring in, it's been a little bit too friendly, a little bit too harmonious and cordial and convivial. So this is punching up. So Damian, would you like to talk about your history with the Goonies and why you were quite happy to, you know, sort of put the crosshairs onto this particular beloved cult classic?
Yeah. I saw it when it first came out. I was born in 1970. So when was this? This came out 85, is that right?
It's 40th anniversary.
85. So I was 14 years old, and I think I enjoyed it at the time, but it just never stuck with me. It wasn't a film that I sort of went back to from that era. And I think I don't know if I've seen it many times since. I did see it earlier this year, and then I saw it at the cinema 2 weeks ago, and had the same sort of feeling, really, that there was a reason why it didn't stick with me, which, you know, I can get into at some point, or I get into right now. Really.
Yeah, you might as well.
Yeah, I just think it's a bit of a mess of a film. I don't think it's as coherent as I want it to be. There's loads of like shouting in it. the all the improvisation that the kids do, shouting on top of each other, while at times that can kind of work, I felt there was just so much of that. And so when you were saying you used the word cloying, that's how I feel when I watch it. I read, I mean, Back to the Future was released like a month after the Goonies, and it's a much better pound for pound kind of film. It's different, but it has a sort of adventure type feel to it. It's a film that holds up more than the Goonies do. I heard Josh Olson saying on the Movies That Made Me that he said everybody over 50, I think this was maybe a couple of years ago, everybody over 50 doesn't like the Goonies, and everybody under 50 around on that cusp really likes it. And I think maybe me being 14 at the time, I don't know, it just wasn't really hitting it. And trust me, I was watching a lot of, John Hughes films, and sort of, which I suppose maybe a little bit at the time were sort of cool for school. But I wasn't, I love E.T. I mean, I still love E.T. And I think that the heart in E.T. is much bigger than the heart in the Goonies. I feel that the characters are not really well drawn. It's a little bit messy. I don't like the set pieces. I don't feel the cohesion of the where we are. Like, as soon as they go under the grate, they're in one set and now they're in another set. And I don't really feel the geography of it sometimes takes me out of the film. I feel like I'm watching a lot of little different set pieces. I don't really like the direction. I don't really like the dialogue. I really didn't like Corey Feldman's character. I think he's just quite a nasty dude. His translation to and like punching down towards the Mexican cleaner is just rude, obnoxious, and like it just lacks any kind of compassion or warmth. I don't think it's funny. I think it's a way of sort of othering people that's kind of borderline racist. I did read something on Reddit that said, somebody said, I'm Mexican, hated the movie as soon as Corey Feldman made fun of the housekeeper. Fuck this movie and fuck the bigot pricks who think it's funny. I think that's a little bit too harsh. but I did when I watched it, I did, and both times I was like, this is just lazy, mate. It's lazy humor.
Yeah.
I didn't like it. It felt off. Samwise Gamgee is a little bit too earnest all the time. I feel that the characters are a little bit too tropey, a little bit that the heart that they have, the brothers have in E.T. I don't feel that heart there. It's not the same. Stand By Me, I think, does it much better. The sort of group of people and the love for each other. I don't feel that it's there in this. I get that it's a well-beloved film, and I'm happy that it's out there. I don't want it not to be there. But yeah, as a personal sort of taste thing, it's not one of my favorites. I'm not buying it on 4K. Yeah, there you go.
Matthew, you've been.
Wow. No, I expected way
you've got the
worse. This is
restraint
like
of a saint, I think.
I feel like I'm about to be like Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi and just go like, yeah, I expected harder edged, like a meaner take. So I appreciate that. It's it's sort of moderate there. I'll start by saying that you began your critique by saying it's a bit of a mess, and I'll say this. And Adam might know this from listening to the podcast for the Western. I love mess. When it comes to movies like Heaven's Gate or some of the more controversial Westerns that have a looser structure that aren't kind of considered perfect works of art, like, you've been comparing this movie to Back to the Future and E.T. I mean, these are like high level screenplays that are studied. So you're setting the bar kind of high. But I would say that kind of messiness of a movie that's my comfort spot, because I don't feel like I'm seeing the same exact movie everybody else is. When I watch Back to the Future, it's such a perfectly constructed screenplay that there's not a lot of room in that movie like that for me to sort of nestle in. I feel like I'm getting the same experience everyone is. It's almost like a math equation, a beautiful, perfect diamond of a math equation. I like the funkiness of the Goonies, that some of it doesn't work. Some of it goes off into tangents that don't pay off. I hate it when everything pays off. Chekhov's gun is one of my least favorite, concepts. So I enjoy the Goonies' weirdness, that overlapping dialogue. I've heard lines in the Goonies after seeing it multiple times that I've never heard before. They're buried in that soundscape. I enjoy that. There's still more avenues for me to follow. Plus, it's built into the structure of the movie. They're often referring to past events, the Goondocks, this and that. The brothers have this shared history. I think names are dropped of people that we never see. So the movie suggests that there's a bigger world out there, and we're just seeing part of it, which feels uncomfortable at times because movies don't often do that. They only give us what we need. So I like that weirdness to it. Also, other things I would say, you mentioned the set pieces don't really spark for you, and I'm totally with you there. This is not Indiana Jones where there those each set piece is like an exquisitely designed thrill machine. Here, I'd say this movie is not about set pieces. They're in there to keep the plot going, but it's a hangout movie, really. We talk about hangout movies. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is one where the characters, you're mostly getting the buzz and the vibe, the camaraderie. That's what this is. It's not about, the organ scene where she has to play the notes and the floor starts falling through. That would be like a sea-level adventure in a Indiana Jones movie. But I don't care that. It's more about what's going on between those characters than the spectacle involved. So the lack of those punchy set pieces don't really bother me too much. Things I do love about it, though, and some of these will address what you were talking about. You mentioned that the kids screech a lot and we can't hear what they're saying. One of my favorite things about the movie is that kind of Altman-esque overlapping dialogue. It feels, to me, authentic in the way kids are messy when they communicate with each other. Everyone is shouting over each other to be heard. Everyone is sort of, struggling for their minute to get their point across. I like that in this movie. I don't have to pay super attention to what they're saying because the movie will occasionally slow down and explain everything. So I'm just kind of catching snippets here. It feels to me often like a John Landis movie meets a Robert Altman movie. There's a lot of John Landis style comedy here, film referential comedy. Lots of movies are brought up in here, from Bond to Superman to the Swashbucklers to King Kong. This is a movie lover's movie. John Landis loved that. Richard Donner clearly loves that. So I like that vibe about it. Also, as a longtime horror fan, I find that the Goonies has do you guys know like what the spook show is all about? Like a spook show vibe. It's like a Rob Zombie term.
Oh, yeah.
Spook shows were like, things at carnivals you would walk through, like a haunted house. And they were full of skeletons. They were full of fake bats and spooky stuff. Not too hardcore horror, but borderline, like the Hardy Boys could be spook shows. And this feels like a modern day Hardy Boys, Little Rascal spook show where there's lots of skeletons in this movie. I appreciate a good skeleton. This movie is full of them. I love the heavy reliance here on practical effects and sets. This is not, thankfully, a CGI heavy movie. It wasn't at the time. CGI was still sort of coming into its own. Terminator 2 was still a few years away. The old school optical effects in this and the hardcore practical special effects are kind of delightful, I think. It harkens back to that moment when movies felt more handmade and not just cutscenes from video games. This feels more like a practical movie. So those are some of the things I like. Also, you mentioned some of the movies that it's aspiring to, maybe like Back to the Future and all those kind of things. I find it much better than the other crop of movies. It's not up there with Back to the Future, but I think it's far more interesting than Harry and the Hendersons or Batteries Not Included or Young Sherlock Holmes, other Spielberg-produced movies in that same era. This one has more funky personality to it. Those movies were kind of so digested. Batteries Not Included and Harry and the Hendersons are just like E.T. with a different monster. This movie feels more unique than those. I prefer it to Home Alone. You mentioned Home Alone, Adam, I think, and I found that was a big step down. It feels so homogenized. It feels like my reaction to Home Alone is what other people's negative reaction is to the Goonies. A lot of mugging, a lot of yelling. I find the villains in the Goonies are much more interesting than those two idiot robbers, mainly because they're played by brilliant character actors. We've got Robert Davi, who I've met a couple of times in person, and he is like weirdo in the best possible way. I love the villains in this movie more so than even the kids. I think it's a an interesting bad guy situation. But I've got more here, but I don't want to hog the whole conversation.
I just to say on top of that, I totally and utterly agree with you. I think that the bad guys, the Fratellis, are by far the most fun bit of the film. I love spending time with Joey Pants and Robert Darby and them mugging and having fun together, like, or just tripping up. I'm down with that, mate. So that was I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you. And I knew that I was going to lose this battle, by the way. I'm just going to.
Well, no, you don't know. You may have an ally in about 30 seconds.
Okay, let's go.
So like, it's like you might have to tag me and I'll come in and take over. Now, my relationship with the Goonies is really weird because I never it passed me by. I was aware of it. I just didn't want to see it when I was a teenager, and I don't think I watched any John Hughes films as well. And I always in my mind, I think I was trying to sort of reverse engineer why I didn't like it. Just go back to what I was thinking when I was 15, and I think I've always seen it, and this is probably retrospective, as kind of falsely John Hughes adjacent rather than sort of lead. No, I know you're pulling a face, and I'm gonna fall on my sword on this one and say I was wrong. I was wrong about that. But I know I saw it as John Hughes adjacent. I think probably because of the presence of Corey Feldman. I don't think he's in a John Hughes movie, but he reminded me a lot of is it Andrew McCarthy in Weird Science, which I think is one of the most obnoxious performances I've ever seen in kind of any movie in the 80s. And so I sort of wrongly sort of put it in that category. But this is going to sound really silly. I think the reason I didn't watch it because I ascertained very, very early on that it wasn't a genuinely supernatural movie, and it didn't have a monster in it. So as a sort of teenager, that was my wheelhouse. It was monsters. It was kind of Aliens, Terminator, RoboCop. The Indiana Jones films obviously had this. So that's why I kind of avoided it. And then I watched it yesterday, fully expecting to dislike it. And I'm so sorry, Damian, but I really enjoyed it. I didn't, and it caught me off guard. It genuinely did. Not to say that I'm not going to agree with some points that Damian made, and maybe take issue with one thing that sort of kind of loops back to Home Alone, that Matthew said. But I did find the. I found the dynamic with the characters really charming. I like them all. Corey Feldman initially got on my nerves, but what I think they didn't put him front and center of the movie. And also he doesn't have it all his own way. He's not a sort of he's not a smart ass that constantly wins. He's constantly getting put on his backside, put down, just made to look a fool. He doesn't, and I just sort of fell in love with Jeff Corey. Chunk, I think he's the heart and soul of the film, and it's such a beautiful performance. And I was actually quite.
He's like a young John Candy in this movie. I think his timing is incredible.
And it sort of slightly broke my heart until I found out that he's probably in a better place now as a sort of entertainment lawyer. It broke my heart that he was the one that didn't go on to sort of a significant film career. I did like the mess of it, actually. I like the cine literacy of it, and just from a time capsule point of view, I was really kind of quite amused by how this was front and center a family film that certainly in Britain has been ratcheted up a certificate because of the language, the smoking, and the bit at the beginning with the breaking the sort of penis off the off the statue, and it just sort of reminded me how feral a lot of 80s family films were. In fact, you have the scene where someone calls someone penis breath in E.T. that always got sort of dubbed out when it was shown on television, and then the sort of ghost blowjob scene in Ghostbusters, which is a big family film, and there was something a little bit rogue and a little bit feral about family films and family blockbusters I kind of like and sort of miss. I'd like to see something like that in whatever the equivalent is today. What I would agree with Damien is I felt like when they went underground, I wish a little bit more care had been taken with the production design to make it look a little bit less like a theme park, because it did feel like you were entering this incredible theme park rather than a subterranean cavern. And I did wish that I did wish they sort of stuck the climax in terms of the action with a little bit more slickness. And so it was interesting that you mentioned Once Upon a Time in Hollywood as a hangout movie, because I think it is a hangout movie. It's a wonderful hangout movie, but when there's a moment of violence, it's done with such sort of slickness and sharpness. You know, the fight with Bruce Lee and Brad Pitt, and the sort of Manson reverse massacre at the end, and the reason I said I thought it was a dummy run for
Home Alone.
Home Alone was that obviously you've got this phenomenal trio of villains, which we condensed to two, but I really do like the sort of precision of the sort of and actually the brutality of the violence in Home Alone. You know, the sort of Warner Brothers brutality, and I felt whereas everything else, even though it was sort of very deliberately baggy and loose, sort of had a sort of, you know, sort of thematic credibility to it. When it came to the confrontations at the end, I felt that the characters betrayed themselves, because we know already that they've killed someone, which I found quite fascinating. That you have this whole business with this corpse that they've shot through the head. They've refrigerated him. They have a whole joke where a child's locked in the room of a dead sort of federal agent. I felt with the ending, it just felt like a little bit. I would have liked a little bit more jeopardy and credibility in the confrontation with the villains. Yes, David.
Do you think that if they kept the octopus scene, it would have felt more complete?
I would have seen it at the cinema if it had an octopus scene in it. Genuinely, if I knew it had a giant octopus, I would have gone to see it in the cinema, because it's a monster. It sort of gets by on a technicality.
I take it you. Yeah, go
for
on.
me with the you mentioned the octopus. I'll just say what I've always thought about that octopus. I was glad they cut it when I heard about it. It just sounded like it was maybe a bridge too far. The octopus was supposed to start like moonwalking at one point, and yeah, he eats a Walkman that Data throws in his mouth, and it freaks the octopus out, and the octopus like does a moonwalk as it's like it was just sounded really stupid.
Yeah, no.
And this movie is a live action cartoon, so you would think the octopus might work there, but the way when I saw the rough cut of it, it sounds like it felt like it was just one step too far to just be dumb instead of kind of cartoonish. Although the octopus does remind me of, I mentioned Robert Altman and how we've got that kind of dialogue style here. The octopus reminds me of the octopus at the end of Popeye. And this movie has a lot of that kind of Popeye feel to it. Popeye was also sort of a sea shanty pirate movie. This has that same element. So the octopus maybe was too close to Popeye. I don't know, but I'm happy that they did cut it. You mentioned Adam, John Hughes. He often gets brought up as though this movie is Hughes adjacent, and a case could be made for that. To me, even at the time I saw it, what I was seeing wasn't something based on, kind of responding to movies that were currently out. It felt like it was responding to those live action Disney movies from the 60s that were often fantasy films, that were often special effects movies with kids. So you had movies like Blackbeard's Ghost, literally a kid's pirate movie with scary stuff, but comedy as well. You'd get Flubber, Escape to Witch Mountain, those kind of fantasy supernatural adventures with little kids in jeopardy and little kids saving the day. They often had cartoonish adult villains. This feels like an homage to those 60s Disney movies more so than a response to the John Hughes movies of the time. You mentioned the production design too. I can see what you're talking about, how it would be nice in one respect, if the caves didn't look so theme parky. But this movie is a Scooby-Doo movie. It might, that kind of intense reality that we get these days in movies like the new Tomb Raiders that they put out or something, and it's been designed to death. Those caves look flawless. Every drop of water is perfect. I don't need all that stuff. I don't mind fake rocks. I love those kind of old sci-fi movies where it would just be a warehouse that they covered some foam in. This feels like that's what this movie is. So, apologies. I just don't. I don't want those caves to be messed with. I found that they're just right the way they are.
I wouldn't if it wasn't a Spielberg production. I think that's the thing as well. I think certainly if Spielberg's doing the second unit on it, I kind of expected a little bit a little bit more in that sense. But no, I'm quite happy with I mean, I watched. I had a great time watching. I don't know, From Beyond the Grave, the Amicus
Hmm.
anthology film. I bought it on Blu-ray and watched it the other day, and that's cheap as chips. Everything looks like it's made in the studio, but it's absolutely delightful, and they really make that work in its favor. And there's just something beautiful in the way that they make something that's cheap and just look more expensive than it is, and even kind of lean into the artificiality of it. And the weird thing is, one of the things I also watched that because I was quite fascinated. I'd like to talk if we've got time about Richard Donner.
Same.
One of the things I did watch earlier today is I watched Nightmare at 20,000 feet, the Twilight Zone episode that he directed, and the monster in that is on many levels ridiculous to look at today, but I just didn't care, and everything looks studio bound, but there's such atmosphere and mood and sort of strangeness and weirdness just to the way the monster's lifted in on wires and lifted out and just the oddness of the design, even though it looks like a man kind of wearing a carpet, I completely bought into it. I say that to illustrate, obviously to sort of talk a little bit about Richard Donner, but also to sort of illustrate that I do like kind of artificiality, but in that instance, it kind of jarred a little bit, and especially because the ship is so beautifully constructed. The ship is astonishing, and I think the location work is so beautiful. You sent us photographs of was it Astoria? You went there,
Yeah.
didn't you? And
And this movie really captures
yeah,
that.
yeah.
I mean, there's those scenes of the kids on the cliffside and it's foggy behind them and the weather is blowing them around. They're wearing raincoats because they have to wear raincoats. That gives this movie I don't know, a mood all its own. This is not sunny California, E.T. poltergeist level, suburban tract houses. This is, you know, rusty old shacks and crumbling wooden structures and seaside cliffs. It feels like a cool, chilly movie, and
I
that sets a
completely
nice
agree.
mythical tone to me.
No, I agree, which sort of slightly jars when you go into a theme park, so
Right,
well, I mean,
right.
which could work. I mean, it could work, because they're literally entering an underworld, a different world, a different reality as well, So, I mean, do you want to talk? I mean, because I was fascinated by the fact that so many of the cars, a couple of the cars died, so it was almost like their last sort of high watermark, sort of apex mountain, if you like. Anne Ramsey being the obvious example. She goes on to do Stop or Your Mum Will Shoot, gets an Oscar nomination, and effectively dies the next year. And the gentleman who played, is it John? Is it Matu? I can't pronounce his name. John, the NFL player.
Matusak?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Matusak,
He
who's
dies
slop.
shortly after that, and then there's this kind of
Yeah.
almost like sort of deferred stardom almost for everyone involved. I mean, Robert Davey has this. Darby has this kind of almost like uninterrupted trajectory that kind of tails off in the 90s, doesn't it? Via License to Kill and Maniac Cop and Die Hard and things like that. So he's like your go-to sort of heavy. And then also, it's almost like Joe Pantoliano has this run in the 90s that probably ends and peaks with his stint in The Sopranos. And then all of the adults have sort of, they come into stardom as, all the children come into stardom as adults, don't they? So can you talk about Robert Darby, having met him? Just picking that one person out.
Yeah, I'll give you just a brief snapshot of that. So, as a journalist here, I have some access to people's reps, their agents and managers and stuff. So I reached out to Robert Davi through his rep to get him onto a James Bond podcast that I was sort of helping with. And he showed up, gave us a great interview. He was a real character, and I stayed in touch with him a little bit, and I messaged him that I was going to be at a concert he was giving. He performs at jazz clubs around LA and does the work of Frank Sinatra. He's a very, very good singer. So I went to see him. He had told me that he was going to have me backstage and he wanted to meet, in person. We had only dealt with through email. So when I went to go backstage after his performance, I wasn't on the list. And I thought, that's the way it goes. Whatever. It was just a flash in the pan. The next morning, I woke up to an email from him or a text saying, "Call me now." from Robert Davi. I mean, you snap to attention when Robert Davi sends, "Call me now." So I called him and he apologized profusely. He said, "It totally, I can't believe I didn't have you on there. Would you be interested in having a lunch? We could go out to my favorite Italian sandwich shop. Lunch is on me. We can catch up. It'll be better." So I went with a buddy of mine, one of the co-hosts of the Bond podcast. And he is everything you would want Robert Davi to be. He is a larger than life figure, literally big dude, and loud and fun and a storyteller. And I mean, he was just such a cool guy. I remember the big moment for me was when we're sitting down and, I'm talking to Robert Davi's wife. She showed up and Davi's looking at his phone and suddenly he kind of goes, he goes, "Shit. Ah, damn it." And I looked over him and I was like, "Is everything okay? Like, is somebody hurt? Like, what's going on?" And he went, "Look at this." And he shows me his phone. And it was another James Bond site. I was doing a brackets on the greatest villains of all time. And he had just lost to Le Chiffre. His character in License to Kill had just been knocked down a peg and he was furious. So he instantly messages those guys and says, "What do you even know anyway, you idiots?" It was so beautiful. Davi is a weird guy and maybe not somebody I'd want to put in charge of the nuclear trigger. He is kind of a loose cannon, might be putting it gently, but he's a real character. And I think his performance in Goonies, he adds menace, but some real humor there. His opera singing scenes, what a weird, fun little odd quirk of that character. I just adore that guy. He's, I wish he would do more.
Absolutely. No, thank you for that. That was marvelous. Can we talk about Richard Donner? Should Richard Donner be considered one of the greatest journeyman directors of the last sort of 30 or 40 years? And I'll just let me make my case. Coming up through television, I think we already mentioned it. He worked pretty much on a roster of sort of cult television programs, The Rifleman, Wanted Dead or Alive. So effectively he's worked with Chuck Connors, Steve McQueen, they're probably on the most kind of revered or recognizable Twilight Zone episode ever, the most referenced Twilight Zone episode, Man from U.N.C.L.E., all that sort of stuff. He's inaugurated 3 franchises. Like he's the original Omen, the original Superman, a whole chunk of Superman 2, and then Lethal Weapon, and then in the middle of that you've got Lady Hawk, Scrooged, and then he becomes Mel Gibson's go-to guy until the wheels come off the wagon with Mel Gibson, and I'm just wondering if it's the over association with Mel Gibson that stops him being looked at like a sort of J. Lee Thompson or a Richard Fleischer. Or I read something once when they were I think this is a little bit too far, where they were putting him, they were saying should he be considered a sort of modern Michael Curtiz? He shouldn't be, but I was kind of astonished by the breadth of work he'd done, and obviously I don't think there's any really authorial signature that is like you can see that that's a Richard Donner movie, and unless having Mel Gibson in it is the authorial signature. But I think all of these are phenomenal films, or the majority of them. I think the first Omen is an outstanding kind of horror film. I think the first Superman it's just a work of wonder. I've probably got as much love for Lady Hawk as you have for the Goonies. That's a very, very sort of special film.
Yeah, same
for me. Yeah. I think certainly the first 2 Lethal Weapon films have a real edge to them. They're sort of very, and then you can throw in, he's pretty much worked with all of the great action, Maverick, Assassin, 16 Blocks. So he's worked, with Sylvester Stallone, Bruce Willis, so and then he goes on to produce The Lost Boys and the sort of Warner Brothers run of X-Men films. And so that's quite a body of work. And on top of it, he seems like a thoroughly decent, benevolent human being as well, which isn't always the case. It's not always part of the equation. So Richard Donner, I'm just going to throw it out. Richard Donner, not an auteur, but forgotten elite journeyman who should be the subject of film festivals and retrospectives and somehow isn't.
Definitely. I'd say Journeyman is doing him a disservice. Not auteur, because he's in some ways a modest guy. He just feels like a more modest filmmaker. Although he makes blockbusters, they, they don't suck all the life out of the room, his movies. They kind of just exist as great movies. All those ones you mentioned, The Omen, the Superman, these are those Lethal Weapons. I think he is better than a journeyman. Like I remember his movies. I remember their names. I never wonder who directed that one again. Where some journeyman filmmakers, I'm always like, this movie could be made by, any one of 4 competent professional movie makers. The Richard Donner ones stick out in my mind as, whether it's through branding or something, that these are Donner movies. He visually, I think there are some connections there. He's not up to the level of like a De Palma or something, but he uses the camera a lot of in the way that De Palma sometimes does with those, and we see it here with those split diopters, those weird angles. He's so I can sense some more life behind the camera in a Richard Donner movie than in some other people's films. But yeah, I agree. Lady Hawk coming out the same year as Goonies. I mean, those are 2 huge movies coming out practically back to back. So there's something, he doesn't get the recognition I think he deserves. I would love it if the American Cinematheque did program a retrospective of his work. I'm sure they might have, and I might have just missed it, but it seems like it would be overdue.
I watched one of Richard Donner's Rifleman episodes, and it was called Gunfire, and again it was terrific, with Lon Chaney Jr. as the villain, and it was just a nice siege episode, and there was a little commonality because there was a nice scuzzy gang that he'd put together, that did remind me a little bit of the gang in he's good at putting scuzzy gangs together, because the gang of drug dealers are like sort of comparably psychotic grown-up versions of like what you get in the Goonies. So I think his television work's phenomenal. The two things I saw today, I'm a fan of Richard Donner, whereas I used to just take him for granted. So I'm going to wave the flag and bang the drum for Richard Donner now.
So if I may, I'm just going to, if I may, I just want to throw out a couple of more things here that are, just scattershot things that we haven't brought up yet that I think deserve just at least being mentioned about Goonies. And one of them is Dave Grusin's score. I think this is a really great score. It is both an old school symphonic adventure score at times, but it's also very modern. It was trying to sort of bridge the gap between 80s, what was hot in 80s, like MTV music, with a like pop edge to it. Modern pop meets big John Williams style symphonic score. We get snippets of that kind of large style music here and there, like when they discover the pirate ship. Suddenly we get these incredible sweeping string piece. Whereas up till then, there are these like kind of spooky 80s pop vibe to it. So I think the score here was so good that it ended up being used constantly in trailers for other movies. This was at that level. Like you could put this on anything and sell it. I think Nick McLean, the DP, the way he shot this film, it looks really good. This is, he uses the full CinemaScope widescreen in some really nice ways. Compositions are always kind of off center, that kind of invites you to find what you're supposed to be looking at in the frame. My eye is constantly wandering around those sets. When they're in the house, for instance, I'm always looking at the shelves, the way the angles are set up, the way, like, it just feels like an interesting environment. And I think that's a combination of both the production design and Nick McLean's lensing. I'd say that you mentioned Jeff Cohen as Chunk. What a performance. He's like a young Chris Farley. He is, his comic timing is perfect. He feels like a vaudeville comedian who's done this a lot. Sean Astin, I think, takes what could have been a very bland leading kid role. Leading kids are usually the least interesting kid in the pack. I think Sean Astin brings a little bit more to that game here. He's kind of, there's something heartbreaking about that character, about his hopefulness. I think his scene with One-Eyed Willie, his like mano-a-mano meeting, is genuinely touching. Corey Feldman, I was a big fan when this movie came out. I had already seen him in Friday the 13th Part 4. He was on my radar as a a genre actor, like an established genre actor. He would go on to do a lot of genre movies like Lost Boys and The Burbs. He spent a lot of time in those movies. So although his scene with Rosalita is pretty rough. You're right there, Damian. That scene is like a quintessential times have changed scene.
Yeah.
Although he commits to it so fully as the bratty kid in that moment that it does work for me. Like I do find myself guiltily laughing along with him, mainly because it's just between the two of them. It's everybody else isn't chiming in, piling on to her. So it is this weird moment between two characters, a bratty kid and Rosalita herself. So yeah, that scene is a little uncomfortable, I'd say. Sloth, I love that character. I mean, here's a character who walks the line between cuddly, but not too cuddly. He is kind of a genuinely grotesque, menacing, creepy character. He's never totally redeemed. He seems lovable, like you want to hug him, but I wouldn't want to leave my kids with him. He's not like Harry and the Hendersons, which felt so syrupy, that Bigfoot character. This character is creepier than that. There's something very Frankensteinian about him.
Would you want to see a Chunk and Sloth sequel? Forget the rest and just see
that would have been nice, like a Hobbs and Shaw or whatever that pairing
or
was in the
Sloth
Fast and the
covering up his I mean Chunk covering up Sloth's murders, things like that.
That would have been. I would have been down with that.
He'll never touch Sloth, but he'll never touch Chunk. But he's quite happy to sort of kind of wreak havoc in the neighborhood.
I'd say Drew Struzan's poster for this film, a legit classic. That when you get Struzan behind your ad campaign, you know you're in good shape. And this one has that classic image of the Goonies dangling off of a cliff in that beautiful Struzan style. We haven't mentioned the Cyndi Lauper song, which was a big hit on MTV when this thing came out. Shot on the same sets. The music video was shot on the same sets as the film was. You get guest stars with Steven Spielberg is in the music video. A bunch of wrestlers are in there. It's a stupid song, but it's pretty catchy, I gotta say. I do enjoy that. Although I like the movie version better where they add an actual chorus of kids yelling, Goonies, 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 echoing in the background. It's a fun little touch there. Favorite scenes, you mentioned one already, the broken penis gag on the statue. I laughed out loud even watching it again in prep for this podcast. It is just the interplay in those scenes is great. When Sean Astin ever yells, "That's my mom's favorite piece." That's just a great line. So, there's a lot to like here, I think.
And is the mum? I should have looked this up. But is the mum Mel Gibson's psychiatrist? Is it the same actress in the Lethal Weapon films?
Oh, I don't know. Now that you mention it, though, I do think you might be right. Yeah, I can picture it. Donner was fond of having a stable of reliable actors that he would use, sometimes in different roles. I know Grandel Bush, I think, plays two different characters in one of his series. In Lethal Weapon, I think he plays two different people, depending on what sequel he's in. So yeah, Donner, it would make sense that mom might still be there.
And
also, I like that we don't spend a lot of time with those parents. This is not a movie where there's a subplot where we have to spend a lot of time with the mom and the dad. They come in like they're in the old Peanuts cartoons. We see them just as much as we need to, and then they are off the screen. This is a movie about the inner lives of kids, and it focuses pretty well there. This is an analogy maybe to the bittersweet end of childhood. This film is that kind of a journey that they go on.
And they're not divorced parents either. So that's like Spielberg taking his fingers out of the pie, and maybe more Chris Columbus, because he really likes absentee parents, doesn't he? Parents just leave their kids to fight criminals and whatnot. So yeah. No, I sort of noticed that there's a kind of reverse. You talked about you hate Chekhov's gun. There's a kind of reverse Chekhov's gun in the sense that they have Chekhov's inhaler, which you think is going to become a big plot point, and then it isn't, and they just throw it away. So that just occurred to me now. So is there anything more to say about once again, you'll probably realize if you listen to a few of our episodes, we constantly fail in our mission to really put the boot in to a film. We always kind of come away kind of liking it a bit more, or at least not quite hating it. I don't know, Damian, are you still full of bile?
You know, to be honest with you, mate, I was always just ambivalent about the film. I never really hated it. I just wasn't really that fussed. It just never kind of gripped me in that way. And I still feel the same way. Like I don't hate it. I don't love it. It's just there, and it's not a film that I'll kind of go back and see, I think, anytime soon. I'm not, attached to it emotionally.
I'm happy with your take on it, Damien. I think while I'm much more effusive to the movie, I think that your points were great. They are not the ones that I was afraid of, which is I've heard so many people just say the kids are annoying. They yell all the time. Everybody's screeching. I hate that. And a lot of times they'll use a line in the film as their defense of it. I hear this all the time. They'll quote Martha Plimpton's character when she says she's getting exasperated down in the tunnels, and she says something like, "I feel like I'm babysitting and I'm not getting paid for it." And they use that and they say that that's what they feel like in the movie. To which I've always said, you're quoting the least likable person in the Goonies. You are quoting the Goonie nobody really needs. She is the cynic, the buzzkill of the group, and that's who you're saying you agree with. That tells me more about maybe where you're coming from than the Goonies.
I don't know as well if being English, we didn't really have that kind of same culture. I think like we watched a lot of those films. It was a different energy, I think, a different vibe. And so when you see something like that, I think maybe I don't know. I can't.
I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that because I think there's I'm going to sort of just quote a British television children's sitcom you probably never heard of called The Double Deckers, which is basically just like Goonies, but without pirates, just a bunch of kids who hang out in an old London double-decker bus, and they have their own song. I think if you go back to Ealing comedies like Hue and Cry, that's effectively the Goonies set on, in London, post-war London, about a bunch of kids who just run around all the bombed-out buildings and kind of make friends with a crime writer played by Alistair Sim and solve murder mysteries. You know, the sort of the famous five is effectively posh Goonies, isn't it? Sort of Enid Blyton. So we have and we were all brought up on Scooby-Doo, so we're watching we've got the same reference points. I mean, Scooby-Doo was kind of ubiquitous when I was a child.
I liked your Robert Altman call. I think that was a nice. I'd watched Nashville earlier this year for the first time, and that's full of that, isn't it? I mean, that's just all that. And I think I equally didn't really care about the characters in Nashville as I did with the Goonies. So I think that maybe that's something. I mean, I enjoyed the film as a piece of cinema history, but I wasn't like, I'm not a big country fan anyway. But yeah, it's very much like that. And I think that certain uses of those scenes, like when they're just about to go off, when they're the penis bit, that whole scene, I think that works great. But I just felt it happens too much afterwards. It keeps going, and I didn't really kind of tune into the quieter bits if there were those bits, But yeah, I mean, look, I love films, mate. I'm not a hater. On this podcast, if you listen to it as well, I'm not, I find it difficult to kind of go in because it takes an army. And the fact that people love a film is wonderful. I hated Moulin Rouge, but loads of people love it. Fair play to them, mate. I don't want them not to have that joy. But yeah.
But I've yet to get you say a nice thing about Matt Damon. That seems to be where all your bile is focused.
I mean, that's a little bit of hyperbole, but I like it.
I don't think it is. I think
I'll go with it, mate.
Yeah,
I don't hate Matt Damon. I'm ambivalent about him.
No, I don't think you are. I think you're playing nice because we have a guest in the room. You've said some really harsh things about Matt Damon.
I have, yeah,
but
possibly.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much, Matthew, for coming on the podcast. It was great. You've
my pleasure.
You lifted us, I think, a little bit.
You've given us a much needed infusion of class and decorum.
Yeah,
wow,
absolutely.
I've never been accused of that before. That's great.
Amazing. Well, I'm going to say goodbye then, and we'll sign off from here. But goodbye from sunny Chesterfield in England.
Goodbye from dusky Nottingham in England.
And I'm here in Los Angeles, and goodbye.
The mission has been completed.
Groovy.